The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the abandoned town. Maria tightened her scarf, the autumn wind carrying a chill and an unsettling silence. She had come to Coldridge to document its history, her journal filled with dates and names. But stepping into the empty streets made her question the assignment. The town felt frozen in time. Rusted cars lined the cracked road, their windows shattered. Faded signs swung lazily in the breeze, their creaking breaking the stillness. Maria wandered to the center of town, her boots crunching on gravel. The dilapidated saloon stood tall, its doors swaying gently as though inviting her inside. Pausing at the threshold, she peered into the gloom. Dust floated like ghosts in the beams of sunlight cutting through broken windows. The silence was absolute. She stepped inside, the wooden floor groaning beneath her weight. Rows of empty tables and chairs sat like an audience, staring at her intrusion. Behind the bar, bottles stood undisturbed, their labels faded and peeling. Maria brushed her fingers across the counter, leaving trails in the thick dust. A sudden thud upstairs made her jump. Her breath caught as she stared at the staircase. "It's probably just the wind," she whispered to herself. Clutching her camera, Maria climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under her weight. The air grew colder, heavy with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. The hallway was narrow and dark, lined with empty rooms. At the far end, a door stood slightly ajar, shadows pooling around its frame. "Hello?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The echo of her words returned, warped and distorted, as if the walls were mocking her. She pushed the door open, revealing a bedroom frozen in disarray. A chair lay toppled, and the bed was unmade, the sheets tangled as if someone had fled in haste. The window was shattered, its jagged edges glinting in the weak sunlight. On the wall, a faded portrait of a family stared down at her solemnly. Maria's gaze lingered on the photograph. The father's face was scratched out, deep grooves cutting through the paper. A chill ran down her spine. She turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her. The force rattled the walls, and a sudden gust of cold air extinguished the light. Her flashlight flickered as she spun around, searching for the source. The room was empty, but the air felt alive, charged with unseen energy. The sound of footsteps echoed outside the door, slow and deliberate. Maria's heart raced as she backed against the wall, gripping her flashlight tightly. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Shadows shifted beneath the gap, and then came a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "You don't belong here." Maria froze, her breath shallow. Summoning her courage, she flung the door open. The hallway was empty, but the oppressive silence had returned, heavier than before. She hurried back downstairs, the saloon feeling darker now. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows as she stumbled into the street. The town felt different. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, creeping closer. Maria glanced over her shoulder, convinced she wasn't alone. She headed toward the church at the edge of town, its bell tower leaning precariously. The sight of it made her uneasy, but she had no better option. The church doors groaned as she pushed them open. Inside, pews sat in disarray, some overturned. A thick layer of dust coated everything, muffling her footsteps. At the altar, a weathered Bible lay open, its pages yellowed with age. Maria hesitated before flipping it closed, revealing a message scrawled beneath in red. The words read, "Leave now, or stay forever." Her stomach churned as she stumbled back, her eyes darting to the dark corners of the room. A low, guttural sound echoed from the bell tower above. It wasn't the wind. It was rhythmic, like a growl rising and falling in waves. Maria hesitated, then climbed the narrow staircase to the tower. The air grew colder with each step, her breaths visible now in the dim light. At the top, the bell swayed gently, though there was no wind. Beneath it, a dark figure stood, facing the window, its back to her. "Who are you?" Maria's voice trembled. The figure didn't move but seemed to grow darker, its edges blurring as if it were swallowing the light. The figure turned slowly, revealing hollow eyes and a face that twisted inhumanly, shifting like shadows caught in a whirlwind. Maria stumbled back in terror. The bell tolled suddenly, deafening and disorienting. Maria covered her ears, but the sound vibrated through her body, shaking the fragile wooden tower. When she opened her eyes, the figure was gone, but the air around her felt heavier, like invisible hands pressing against her chest. She bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. Outside, the sky had darkened unnaturally, clouds swirling above the ghost town. The shadows on the street moved now, independent of their surroundings. They stretched and twisted, creeping toward her as she ran. Maria's car was parked on the outskirts of town, but the road seemed longer now, stretching endlessly as if the town itself refused to let her leave. She stumbled through the uneven ground, her breath ragged. Behind her, whispers rose, growing louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. The whispers formed words now. Stay. Join us. Forever. Maria's heart pounded as she pushed forward, her legs burning with each desperate step. Reaching her car, she fumbled for her keys. The whispers were deafening now, and she could feel the air behind her growing colder. The engine roared to life, and she floored the gas pedal. The tires spun on the loose gravel before finding traction, propelling her forward. In her rearview mirror, the town shrank into the distance, but the shadows seemed to linger, stretching impossibly far. The whispers faded, but not completely. Maria didn't stop driving until she reached the next town, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. She tried to tell the locals what happened, but no one believed her. They only shook their heads, warning her to stay away from Coldridge. That place isn't for the living, one old man said. Maria left town the next day, but the whispers stayed with her. At night, she heard them in the corners of her room, faint but unmistakable. She never told anyone else what happened, but the nightmares never stopped. And sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she saw shadows stretching toward her. The desert sun dipped low, casting eerie orange hues across the barren ghost town. Alex tightened their backpack straps, curiosity outweighing the unease gnawing at their gut. Rumors about Dry Creek's curse had circulated for decades. Abandoned for reasons no one could confirm, the town was said to hold secrets best left undiscovered. Alex stepped onto the cracked main street, their boots kicking up dust that lingered unnaturally in the still air. The silence was deafening, broken only by their heartbeat. Dilapidated wooden buildings flanked the road, their windows shattered and walls weathered by time. A faded sign reading General Store creaked faintly in the dry wind. Stopping outside the store, Alex debated going in. The doorway yawned like a hungry mouth, daring them to enter. The air seemed heavier the closer they got. Inside, shelves leaned at awkward angles, covered in decades of grime. Cans with rusted labels sat untouched, as if frozen in time. Alex took a cautious step forward. A sudden crash behind them made Alex whirl around. A tin can rolled across the floor, stopping at their feet. They scanned the room, finding nothing but shadows. "Hello?" Alex called out, their voice trembling slightly. Only silence answered, thick and oppressive. They crouched to pick up the can, but a cold draft grazed their neck. Spinning around, Alex saw faint footprints in the dust. Small, barefoot prints that hadn't been there moments ago. Their stomach tightened, and they stumbled backward. Deciding the store held no answers, Alex retreated outside. The evening light was fading, and the shadows of the town stretched long and sinister across the ground. The saloon across the street stood tall, its swinging doors eerily intact. Alex hesitated but pushed through, the creaking hinges echoing in the empty interior. Inside, tables and chairs sat haphazardly, as if abandoned mid-meal. A dusty piano stood against one wall, its keys yellowed with age. Alex shivered at the sight. Crossing the room, they noticed a single glass on the bar. It was pristine, untouched by the dust that coated everything else. The sight made Alex's skin crawl, A faint melody drifted through the room, soft and broken. The piano seemed untouched, yet the sound grew louder. Alex backed away, their breath catching in their throat. The music stopped abruptly, leaving a suffocating silence. A faint whisper followed, unintelligible but unmistakable, seeping from the walls like water through cracks. "Who's there?" Alex demanded, their voice shaking. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices swirling around them. Panic rising, Alex bolted for the door. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying with it an eerie, almost human wail. The temperature plummeted, and Alex could see their breath fogging in the cold. The streetlights, long broken, began to flicker faintly. Alex turned in a slow circle, searching for the source of the strange energy that now suffused the air. A shadow moved at the edge of their vision. Turning sharply, Alex saw nothing but empty streets. Yet the feeling of being watched grew unbearable. They headed toward the church at the far end of town, its spire silhouetted against the deepening twilight. The building radiated a strange pull, both foreboding and inviting. The church doors groaned loudly as Alex pushed them open. Inside, the pews were in disarray, and the faint smell of decay hung in the air. A single candle flickered on the altar, though no one was around to have lit it. Alex approached cautiously, the flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. Behind the altar hung a faded painting of the town's founder, his face twisted in an expression of what looked like fury or despair. The eyes seemed to follow Alex. As they reached the altar, the candle extinguished itself. Darkness enveloped the room, and the heavy wooden doors slammed shut, trapping Alex inside. Their flashlight beam trembled as they scanned the room. Shadows darted at the edges of the light, too quick to follow but unmistakably there. A deep, guttural voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere. "You shouldn't have come." The words reverberated, shaking the walls and rattling the remaining pews. Heart pounding, Alex sprinted for the doors, but they wouldn't budge. The voice laughed, low and menacing, as the shadows closed in around them. Suddenly, the room shifted. Alex stood now in the middle of the street, the church gone. The town seemed alive, yet wrong. Lights flickered in the windows. Figures moved behind the broken glass. Impossible figures, their shapes distorted and their movements jerky, like marionettes controlled by unseen strings. The whispers returned, louder and clearer. "Stay with us." They overlapped, growing louder until Alex screamed just to drown them out. A cold hand brushed Alex's arm, and they turned to find no one there. The whispers turned to laughter, cruel and mocking, echoing off the empty buildings. Desperation took hold as Alex ran toward the edge of town. But no matter how far they ran, the town stretched endlessly before them, a cruel, unending maze. Collapsing to their knees, Alex screamed into the void. The shadows circled closer, whispering, laughing, feeding on their fear. Tears streamed down Alex's face. A voice different from the rest spoke clearly. "You can leave, but you'll never truly escape." The words carried a weight that Alex couldn't ignore. With no other choice, Alex staggered back to the car. It started immediately and they drove away, the headlights slicing through the encroaching darkness. In the rearview mirror, the town's outline faded, replaced by a wall of endless desert. Alex exhaled shakily, relief washing over them. But the whispers didn't stop. Even as they reached the highway, faint voices lingered in their mind, promising they'd return to Dry Creek. For the rest of their life, Alex avoided ghost towns. But in every shadow and every quiet moment, they could still hear the voices calling them back. The old highway stretched endlessly under a gray, oppressive sky. Clara checked her map again, the inked lines leading her straight to Hollow Ridge, a forgotten ghost town. Legends claimed it was cursed, abandoned in haste decades ago. As a journalist chasing local folklore, Clara couldn't resist. But now the quiet felt too absolute. Her car slowed as cracked, faded buildings emerged from the haze. The silence deepened. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the desolation ahead. Parking near a collapsed barn, Clara grabbed her camera and notebook. The first thing she noticed was the eerie stillness, as if the world had stopped breathing. The main street was lined with empty storefronts and leaning lampposts. Signs dangled precariously, their paint flaking away. Clara's boots echoed unnervingly on the dusty road. Something about the air felt wrong. It wasn't just still. It was heavy, charged with an energy she couldn't place. She shivered despite the warm afternoon. Her first stop was the post office. Inside, cobwebs hung like curtains, and faded letters lay scattered on the floor. Time had seemingly frozen here. One envelope caught her eye, still sealed and addressed. She picked it up, the brittle paper crumbling slightly at her touch. The inked name, Eleanor Ridgway. The name was familiar. She'd seen it in her research. Eleanor was the mayor's daughter, rumored to have vanished just before the town's sudden abandonment. A floorboard creaked behind her. Clara froze, her heart pounding. She spun around, but the room was empty. The only movement was the dust swirling in her flashlight beam. Shaking off the unease, she left the post office and headed for the saloon. The doors hung crookedly, swinging slightly in a breeze she couldn't feel. The saloon reeked of decay. Broken bottles littered the floor, and overturned chairs lay scattered as if a brawl had broken out and never been resolved. Clara stepped behind the bar, her fingers brushing against an old ledger. She opened it cautiously, finding names and dates scrawled in faded ink. The last entry chilled her. All debts forgiven. May God help us. It was dated the same day the town was said to have been abandoned. A low moan echoed through the saloon, faint but unmistakable. Clara's breath hitched as she turned, her flashlight revealing nothing but empty shadows. The moan came again, louder this time and closer. Panic bubbled in her chest. She backed out of the saloon, her pulse racing with each step. Back on the street, the sky had darkened unnaturally fast. The buildings seemed taller now, their angles distorted, as if the town itself was shifting. The church bell rang once, its deep toll reverberating through the empty town. Clara turned toward it, her curiosity overriding her fear. The church stood at the end of the street, its windows broken and the spire leaning precariously. The bell rang again, louder this time. Inside, the pews were splintered, and the altar was draped in torn fabric. A single candle burned on the pulpit, though no one was there to light it. Clara's eyes were drawn to a book lying open on the altar. Latin words filled the pages, accompanied by crude sketches of symbols and faces. The air grew colder as she approached. Whispers filled the room, faint and indistinct. They came from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding her like a suffocating fog. Her fingers brushed the book and the whispers stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even more unnerving, pressing down on her like a weight. A shadow moved at the corner of her vision. Clara whipped around, but the room was empty. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, the church doors slammed shut behind her. The candle's flame flickered violently before extinguishing, plunging the room into darkness. She fumbled for her flashlight, the beam revealing claw-like scratches etched into the walls. They hadn't been there moments ago. A guttural voice whispered directly into her ear, "You shouldn't have come." Clara screamed, dropping her flashlight. The sound echoed endlessly in the empty church. Scrambling to retrieve it, she felt the ground beneath her shift. The floorboards groaned, and the air vibrated with a low, menacing hum. The whispers returned, louder and overlapping, filling her head until she thought her skull would crack. She bolted for the doors, clawing at them desperately. The doors gave way, and Clara stumbled into the street. The town looked different now, darker, more alive, as if the buildings were breathing. Figures moved in the windows, distorted shapes with glowing eyes. They watched her, their heads tilting unnaturally as she staggered backward. A child's laughter echoed, high-pitched and chilling. Clara turned to see a small figure standing in the middle of the road holding a tattered doll. The child's face was wrong, blurred, shifting, as if it couldn't decide what it should look like. It smiled, and its teeth were sharp and glistening. Clara ran, her legs burning as she sprinted toward her car. The whispers followed, growing louder, blending into screams that seemed to come from the ground itself. Reaching the car, she yanked the door open and fumbled with the keys. The engine sputtered to life and she slammed on the gas. The town blurred past her as she sped down the road. But no matter how far she drove, the buildings remained in her rearview mirror. Panic clawed at her throat. She checked the clock on the dashboard. It hadn't moved. Time itself seemed frozen, trapping her in an endless loop. Finally, the road gave way to open desert. The whispers faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. Clara dared to hope she'd escaped. But as she glanced in the mirror, the child's face appeared, smiling that jagged smile. The whispers returned, louder than ever. Clara's scream was swallowed by the desert, the car skidding to a halt. The town's outline loomed ahead once more, waiting for her return.